When the first episode of Top Bingeable Scary Stories aired, no one could have anticipated the effect it would have. It was just another low-budget streaming anthology show. Unscripted tales of terror that felt strangely real but were obviously fake, or so everyone assumed. But rumors spread among the cast and crew about strange occurrences on set. Lights flickering during key scenes, camera glitches, cast members hearing their own voices in places they hadn't been. Nothing overtly dangerous at first, just the unnerving feeling that something was watching. The show followed the usual horror tropes. There were eerie hotels, haunted forests, cursed objects, but with each new episode, the scenarios seemed to grow eerier and closer to real life, as though someone were recounting memories instead of acting. Actors began to complain, saying they were experiencing nightmares about scenes they had filmed. They would wake up, drenched in sweat, unable to shake the feeling of being trapped in those nightmare scenarios. They saw themselves stumbling through endless forests, their cries echoing without answer, or trapped in dusty, abandoned buildings with creaking floors and shadows that seemed to move when they weren't looking. At first, the network brushed it off as a good sign. "It means the show is working," they said, thrilled by the audience's rave reviews and binge-watching sprees. But as the episodes continued, a new rumor took hold. People started claiming that the actors weren't acting. They swore that the terror in their eyes, the gasps for breath, the trembling hands, all of it was real. A subreddit dedicated to the show blossomed with self-proclaimed experts analyzing the episodes frame by frame, debating whether the cast members were actors or actual victims. Then, episode 10 aired. It was a story about an entity known only as the Watcher, a ghostly figure that would follow its victims home and haunt them in their own lives. It appeared in reflections, the cast explained in eerie, terrified whispers, always just behind them but somehow impossible to touch. They'd hear footsteps in their own houses, see faces pressed against their windows late at night, yet when they tried to record or show anyone, nothing was there. The fan theories exploded. The subreddit went wild as people compared their own stories of the Watcher. Some claimed they had started seeing things themselves, unfamiliar faces peering from their mirrors, shadows flitting across their living rooms. At first, these comments were brushed off as mere hype, people caught up in the show's eerie allure. But the comments persisted and multiplied. More and more viewers shared unsettling experiences. And then one day, an episode vanished. Episode 11, which was supposed to premiere at midnight, didn't appear on the platform at all. Fans immediately assumed it was a publicity stunt. They flooded the streaming service's social media pages with complaints and questions, but the company remained silent. No official reason was given. Eventually, a message appeared on the subreddit from a user claiming to be an insider from the production team. They warned viewers to stop watching. They explained that strange things had begun happening to them, that they'd been experiencing the same type of hauntings described in the show. The more involved they got in the production, the worse it became. But it wasn't until the episode about the Watcher that things got truly horrifying. As it turned out, the cast hadn't been acting in episode 10. They'd been truly terrified, running through an actual maze of empty hallways, chased by something they couldn't see, only hear. They'd stumbled, screamed, and wept as they tried to escape the set, but it felt like something had trapped them there. The Watcher had moved beyond the script, reaching out into the real world, finding new prey in anyone who watched. The production team was shutting down, the user warned. The cast had refused to film any more episodes, some even quitting the entertainment industry altogether. Still, the die-hard fans were skeptical, convinced it was all part of the game. They begged for details, screenshots, anything to prove the story. But the next day, the account vanished without a trace. The users' posts were deleted, leaving only a cryptic message in their profile description: "He's always watching." People tried to forget it, but for some, it was too late. Soon, posts flooded the internet, describing strange occurrences that lined up with the events of the show. Reports emerged of people who had been binge-watching the series suddenly disappearing without a trace. Police tried to investigate, but there was nothing to find. All they could piece together were discarded streaming devices, often left on, still looping the series, even after the disappearances. That's when the final rumor took hold. The only way to escape the Watcher was to never finish the show. Those who did never came back. The show was eventually pulled from streaming, yet a handful of people still searched for it in the dark corners of the internet, hoping to find that missing episode 11, desperate to complete the story, because some horrors are irresistible. And now, whenever anyone asks what happened to those last viewers, the ones who searched for more, well, no one knows for sure. But they say if you listen closely enough, you can still hear whispers from them, warning you to stop watching. The Shifting Shadows became infamous long before it even aired. Rumors circulated that it was cursed. Officially, it was a mockumentary-style horror series inspired by supernatural tales and legends. But according to whispers online, the filming itself had been plagued by strange occurrences like power surges, lost footage, and even unexplained injuries. Cast and crew members shared stories of shadows that moved on their own, flickering lights, and whispers on the audio that none of them could explain. The project was eventually abandoned, the studio citing unforeseen issues. But months later, the raw footage leaked, and soon enough, a bootleg version made its way onto the internet, shared through obscure, password-protected websites. When people began watching The Shifting Shadows, most dismissed it as a hoax or an elaborate guerrilla marketing scheme. The footage was grainy, the audio distorted, and the imagery unsettling but vague. However, those who watched it began experiencing strange phenomena of their own. It started with subtle shifts in the environment, shadows seeming to stretch just a little too far or linger just a moment too long. Doors creaked open on their own, lights flickered more often than usual. Soon, viewers began reporting stranger incidents. In an online forum dedicated to horror, a user named Darkseeker posted about a recurring nightmare they'd had since watching The Shifting Shadows. In the dream, they'd find themselves in a dark room with walls that seemed to breathe, pressing in closer each night like something alive and watching. A shadow figure stood in the far corner, its shape shifting every time they looked away. Every night, it grew closer, inch by inch. Darkseeker's posts became more erratic and panicked, describing how the nightmare was seeping into their reality. They'd wake up feeling paralyzed, unable to move, and when they could, they'd find things in their room out of place, as though someone or something had been there while they slept. One night, Darkseeker stopped posting altogether. Others who watched the footage started experiencing similar events. A user named Only Screams posted that they'd seen their reflection move in the mirror after watching the final clip from the show. They described how their reflection's eyes seemed different, hollow, darker somehow, as though staring right through them. They tried breaking the mirror, hoping that would rid them of the apparition, but nothing changed. They even claimed to see the shadowy figure from The Shifting Shadows hovering in the background, just behind their shoulder, visible only in the mirror's shattered fragments. The user disappeared shortly after, their account deleted. The phenomenon continued to spread, with people reporting odd occurrences after watching even snippets of the footage. Some viewers saw flickering shadows in their homes, others heard low whispers in the dead of night, and a few even claimed that a figure had appeared in their dreams, speaking to them in a language they couldn't understand but somehow knew was a warning. Soon, a chilling theory began to circulate. The shadow in the footage wasn't just a figment of fear. It was an entity, drawn to those who watched. Those who had gone missing, like Darkseeker and Only Screams, had crossed some unseen boundary by watching too much. They had allowed the entity to enter their lives fully, and now it was pulling them into its own dark dimension, erasing them from this world. Determined to get to the bottom of it, a group of fearless fans set to watch every second of the footage in one sitting, hoping to debunk the urban legends. They recorded their reactions live, streaming the entire experience for proof. At first, they laughed off the eerie moments, mocking the rumors, joking about the shadows in the background. But as the hours ticked by, their expressions changed. The shadows on screen seemed to stretch, darkening until they nearly obscured the faces of the cast. Whispers could be heard, low and guttural, although no one was speaking. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the stream. One of the viewers screamed, clutching their head, while another froze, staring wide-eyed at the screen. "It's here," he whispered, his face growing paler as the shadow moved, bending its shape until it pressed right up against the camera lens, darkening the stream. The screen went black, the only sound a faint whisper, repeating one sentence over and over, "You invited me in." The stream cut out. When the feed finally came back hours later, the room was empty, their equipment still running but with no sign of the viewers. Police investigated the apartment, but there was no trace of anyone there, no sign of struggle, and no recordings left on the hard drives. After that night, the bootleg footage vanished from the internet, disappearing without a trace. But those who had watched it continued to report strange occurrences. Shadows that lingered a beat too long, whispers that seemed to follow them from room to room. Some even claimed to feel a cold hand brushing the back of their neck when they turned off the lights, as though the shadow was only waiting for them to let their guard down. The last known post in the horror forum was from an anonymous user who claimed they had tracked down a copy of The Shifting Shadows on an obscure streaming site, hidden in a maze of broken links. They dared anyone brave enough to watch the whole thing to see if they could survive the shadows. The post ended with a warning, but don't look at your reflection after, because if you see it there, it might already be too late. Since that post, no one has heard from the user again. And for those brave or foolish enough to search for the footage, the whispers persist. They say, if you listen closely at night, you can hear the faintest sound, like someone muttering just out of reach, their voice dark as a shadow and cold as death, whispering, "You invited me in." Years after the phenomenon, people still whispered about the Forgotten Forest. It was originally intended as an interactive web series where fans could vote on characters' decisions affecting the storyline as they explored a legendary haunted forest. The producers had chosen a real forest known for strange disappearances, aiming for an authentic, spine-chilling experience. It was a remote, dense woodland, thick with mist and towering trees whose twisted branches blotted out the sky even on clear days. Locals called it the Endless Wood, and everyone knew someone who had a story about it. Production was rocky from the start. Equipment mysteriously malfunctioned, drone cameras went missing, and the audio was plagued with strange, echoing sounds. The cast and crew joked about ghosts, but the air was heavy with unease, and the veteran cameramen muttered about feeling watched. They'd seen plenty of horror sets, but this forest felt different, like it was alive and listening. The storyline was simple. 5 contestants would enter the forest to find an ancient artifact rumored to break the curse on the woods. As the series progressed, viewers would vote on their choices, deciding which paths they'd take and which risks they'd face. Fans were thrilled at first. It was like they were guiding the characters through a horror video game, watching them stumble upon eerie relics, strange symbols carved into tree trunks, and unsettling discoveries that hinted at something deeply wrong. The first unsettling incident happened during a live stream. The audience had voted for the characters to enter an abandoned cabin deep in the forest. As the cast explored, the stream began to glitch. The screen flickered, and faces appeared in the static. Quick, brief flashes of pale, sunken eyes and expressions twisted in terror. For a moment, it looked as if other people were in the cabin, their figures barely visible, lingering in the shadows. Fans in the chat tried to warn the characters, spamming messages about seeing figures lurking behind them, but the cast saw nothing. The stream cut out abruptly, and when it returned, the cast looked visibly shaken, one of them complaining about a cold that seemed to cling to their skin. When they left the cabin, another strange occurrence happened. As they panned the camera back to the trail, there was a figure standing at the edge of the path, almost blending into the shadows, completely motionless. The cast laughed it off, thinking it was one of the crew playing a prank. But when they radioed back, no one on the crew admitted to being there. With each episode, the forest seemed to grow more malevolent. Characters began hearing footsteps that weren't theirs, strange, distant laughter, and whispers too faint to make out, but chilling enough to freeze them in place. Viewers noticed that the deeper the cast went, the more the forest seemed to change. Paths they had taken before seemed to loop back on themselves, leaving them circling in confusion. Fans became obsessed, analyzing every detail of the series. They zoomed in on frames, rewatched scenes in slow motion, and shared screenshots. The most disturbing find was a set of photos showing strange, barely visible faces in the trees, distorted as though stretched and frozen in silent screams. People called it a trick of the light, but a few hardcore viewers swore that the faces were becoming clearer with each episode, and that they sometimes looked like the cast members themselves. Then, something horrifying happened. During a live voting event, the cast came across a massive tree with a hollowed-out trunk. A viewer poll had directed them to investigate inside. As they aimed their flashlights into the hollow, one cast member, Sarah, froze, her face going pale. She swore she saw her own face staring back at her, distorted and gaunt, with hollow, dead eyes. Suddenly, the camera panned sharply, capturing only a blur of movement, before the screen cut to black. When the feed resumed, Sarah was gone. The crew frantically searched the area, and the cast called her name, but Sarah had vanished without a trace. The forest was silent, her calls for help swallowed by the trees. The episode ended abruptly, and the streaming platform announced a temporary hiatus, explaining that the production needed to assess safety conditions. Fans were left with an ominous message on screen. She's part of the forest now. After a week with no updates, fans grew impatient, demanding answers. The streaming company finally issued a statement. The show was canceled, citing unforeseen circumstances. They provided no further explanation, but rumors ran wild. People claimed that Sarah's face had appeared in the background of certain scenes throughout the series, as though she had always been there, watching herself from the trees, trapped in a nightmare loop. Months later, fans on a dedicated forum shared a leaked post allegedly from a former crew member. According to the post, something about the Forgotten Forest had gone terribly wrong. The crew member claimed that the forest had a mind of its own, twisting paths, moving landmarks, trapping anyone who strayed too far from the group. They mentioned seeing things that shouldn't have been possible. Unfamiliar faces blending into the trees, moving shadows that stayed even in the stillest moments. They said Sarah was only one of several people who had vanished during filming, but that production had covered it up, hoping to finish the series despite the growing danger. And then, one last haunting detail was revealed in the post. The crew member described how on the last day they'd been in the forest, they'd heard voices calling from the distance, voices they recognized. It was Sarah's voice, mixed with others, pleading and whispering, saying only one thing over and over: turn back before it's too late. The leaked post was deleted within hours, and the user never posted again. The website the series had streamed on was taken down without notice, its archives completely erased, as though the show had never existed. But some fans, the ones who had downloaded each episode and scoured it for secrets, still claimed that the forest itself was haunted, that anyone who dared to watch the footage for too long would start to see shadows moving in their own home, or hear faint whispers urging them to come closer to their screens. To this day, it's said that if you find a recording of the Forgotten Forest, you should never watch it to the end, because once you do, the forest remembers you. And those who have watched it all, well, no one really knows what happened to them. But sometimes when the wind blows through the trees, locals swear they can hear a whisper carried through the rustling leaves, faint but unmistakable. Turn back, or be forgotten to.